The golden sunset cast long shadows over the dusty main street of Red Cloud, Nebraska, as Naomi Winters clutched her meager belongings and her precious 6-month-old son to her chest. Her arms ached from the journey, her heart heavy with the weight of decisions that had brought her to this frontier town in the spring of 1878. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and night was falling fast over the unforgiving prairie. Naomi had been traveling for days, fleeing a life she could no longer endure. Her husband, once promising and kind, had revealed a cruel nature after their wedding, one that had only worsened with drink and gambling debts. When he had raised his hand to her one too many times, she had gathered what little she could carry, taken their infant son, and fled in the night. The money she had saved from selling her mother's silver brooch had only gotten them this far to Red Cloud, a town she knew nothing about except that it was far from her past. The baby stirred against her, whimpering softly. Little James was hungry, tired, and needed a proper place to rest. Naomi's own stomach ached with hunger, but her concern was only for her child. She glanced around desperately, spotting a livery stable at the edge of town. Perhaps there, at least, they could find shelter for the night. As she approached the weathered building, the scent of hay and horses filled her nostrils. The stable door stood slightly ajar, a lantern hanging outside casting a warm glow. Naomi hesitated, then pushed the door open wider, peering inside. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice trembling. "Is anyone here?" No answer came, but the stable appeared empty of people, occupied only by several horses in their stalls. In one corner, she spotted a fresh pile of clean hay, recently forked and piled high. It looked softer than anything she had slept on in days. With a sigh of relief, Naomi made her way to the hay pile. She arranged some of it into a small nest and carefully placed her sleeping son in the middle, wrapping him in the only blanket she had. James settled immediately, his tiny face relaxed in slumber. Naomi sank down beside him, her body trembling with exhaustion. She must have dozed off, because the sound of boots on the wooden floor startled her awake. Naomi sat up quickly, positioning herself protectively in front of her baby, ready to flee or fight if necessary. A tall man stood in the entrance, his broad shoulders silhouetted by the dying light outside. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, worn denims, a simple shirt, boots caked with dust, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows over his face. At his hip, she glimpsed the unmistakable shape of a holstered revolver. "Madam," he said, his voice deep but not unkind, "this ain't a hotel." He stepped closer, and the light from the lantern revealed a face weathered by sun and wind, with piercing blue eyes that studied her with curiosity rather than threat. Naomi swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. We had nowhere else to go. We'll leave right away." She moved to gather James, but the sudden motion woke him, and he began to cry, his tiny wails echoing in the stable. The man's expression softened as his gaze fell on the baby. He approached slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal, and crouched down to get a better look. "That's no place for a little one," he said, his voice gentler now. He looked up at Naomi, taking in her travel-worn appearance, and the fear in her eyes. "Her baby was sleeping in a basket of hay," he murmured, almost to himself, then added with unexpected tenderness, "He deserves a cradle, and you deserve rest." Naomi stared at him, uncertain how to respond to this kindness from a stranger when kindness had been so scarce in her life of late. "Name's Zachary Zimmerman," the cowboy said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks call me Zach. I work this livery for Mr. Donovan." He paused, studying her face. "You look like you've come a long way." "Naomi Winters," she replied hesitantly. "And this is James." The baby had quieted somewhat but still fussed in her arms. "We have come a long way. From Illinois." Zach nodded, his expression unreadable. "Well, Mrs. Winters, you can't stay here. But I've got a small cabin just behind the livery. It ain't much, but it's dry and warm. You and your boy are welcome to it for the night." Suspicion flared in Naomi's eyes. Her recent experiences had taught her to be wary of men's offers. Why would you do that? You don't know me. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Madam, out here in Nebraska territory, you learn quick that folks need to help each other to survive. I ain't offering anything except a roof and some food. The cabin's got 2 rooms, and I'll take the one by the door. He stood up, backing away slightly to give her space. But if you prefer, I can point you toward the church. Pastor might be able to help you, though at this hour, he's likely asleep. Naomi looked down at her son, whose cries had subsided into hiccuping whimpers. The thought of wandering the unfamiliar streets in the dark, looking for the church, was daunting. And this man, this Zachary Zimmerman, had kind eyes that reminded her of her father's, honest and steady. I would be grateful for your help, she said finally, rising to her feet with James cradled against her chest. But please understand, Mr. Zimmerman, that I have nothing to offer in return. Wasn't asking for anything, he replied simply. He picked up her small bag before she could protest. This way. And it's just Zach. He led her out of the stable and around to the back, where a modest log cabin stood, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Inside, it was sparse but clean, a small sitting area with a wooden table and 2 chairs, a cookstove in the corner, and 2 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Fire's still going, Zach said, setting her bag down. Got some stew left from dinner. You look like you could use a meal. Naomi couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper hot meal. That would be wonderful, she admitted. And perhaps some warm water for the baby? He needs changing, and I'd been making do with creek water. Zach nodded and went about heating water on the stove while Naomi settled on one of the chairs, cradling James against her. The warmth of the cabin began to seep into her bones, and for the first time in days she felt the iron grip of fear begin to loosen. As she watched her unlikely host move efficiently around the small space, she wondered what circumstances had brought him to this life alone in a cabin behind a livery stable in a frontier town. He didn't wear a wedding band, and there were no signs of a woman's touch in the cabin. Yet he moved with the confidence of a man comfortable with his place in the world. Zach placed a bowl of stew before her, along with a chunk of bread and a cup of water. Eat, he encouraged. I'll hold the little one if you like. Naomi hesitated, but her hunger won out. She carefully transferred James to Zach's waiting arms, surprised at how naturally he held the baby. Most men she knew were awkward with infants, but Zach cradled James with the ease of experience. You have children of your own? She asked, taking a spoonful of the surprisingly good stew. A shadow passed over Zach's face. Had a son, he said quietly. And a wife. Yellow fever took them both 5 years ago, back in Missouri. I'm sorry, Naomi said, understanding now his willingness to help a mother and child. That's a terrible loss. Zach nodded, his attention focused on James, who had settled contentedly in his arms. Your husband? He asked after a moment. He coming to join you? Naomi's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. No, she said finally. He's not. James and I are on our own now. Zach didn't press for details, just nodded again. Red Cloud's a decent town. Growing. Might be a place for a fresh start, if that's what you're looking for. Perhaps, Naomi said noncommittally. She hadn't thought beyond finding immediate safety. The idea of building a new life seemed overwhelming. There's work to be had, Zach continued. Town's growing fast since the railroad came through. Needs all sorts of services. He glanced at her hands, which despite the dirt of travel showed signs of refinement. You have any skills? Besides mothering, that is. I was a schoolteacher before I married, Naomi admitted. And I sew well enough. Well now, that's fortunate, Zach said, a genuine smile warming his features. Town's been looking for a proper teacher for months. Current one's just a pastor's wife filling in, and she's expecting her 4th child come fall. For the first time in many days, Naomi felt a flutter of hope. Do you really think they would consider me? A stranger with a baby and no husband? Folks around here judge on ability more than circumstance, Zach said. Not to say there aren't gossips, but most people are too busy trying to make their own way to worry over much about others. He shifted James slightly, looking down at the infant's peaceful face. Besides, a woman willing to travel all this way alone with a baby has the kind of grit Red Cloud respects. They fell into comfortable silence as Naomi finished her meal. The stew had filled her stomach and the warmth of the cabin had seeped into her bones, making her eyelids heavy. When she stifled a yawn, Zach rose carefully with James still in his arms. "Second door's the bedroom," he said, nodding toward it. "Clean sheets on the bed. There's a wash basin and some soap if you want to freshen up." He handed James back to her. "I'll be in the other room if you need anything." Naomi accepted her son, surprised by the reluctance she felt at their separation. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, Zach. Your kindness won't be forgotten." He ducked his head slightly, as if embarrassed by her gratitude. "Get some rest, Mrs. Winters. Morning comes early around here." The bedroom was small but tidy, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a wooden chest at its foot, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. Naomi changed James's wrappings with the warm water Zach had provided, nursed him until he fell asleep, then washed her own face and hands. The simple act of cleanliness made her feel more human again. As she settled into the bed with James beside her, Naomi found herself thinking about the cowboy in the next room. His unexpected kindness had thrown her off balance. After months of her husband's escalating cruelty, followed by days of fear as she fled, Zach's simple decency seemed almost unreal. Yet there was something solid about him, something trustworthy that reminded her of the good men she had known in her childhood, her father, her uncles, men who understood that strength was meant to protect, not harm. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee brewing. Naomi dressed quickly, straightened the bed, and changed James before emerging from the bedroom. Zach was at the stove, his back to her as he fried bacon in a cast-iron pan. "Morning," he said without turning. "Coffee's hot if you want some. Milk's in the pitcher for the little one, if he takes it." "Good morning," Naomi replied, surprised by the domesticity of the scene. "James is still nursing, but thank you. Coffee sounds wonderful." She hadn't had coffee in days, having spent what little money she had on necessities for James. Zach nodded, sliding bacon onto a plate and cracking eggs into the hot fat. "Thought I might take you over to meet Mrs. Hendricks after breakfast, if you're agreeable. She's on the school board, and her husband's the mayor." Good people. Naomi felt a flutter of anxiety. So soon? I'm hardly presentable for making such an important acquaintance. Zach turned then, giving her an appraising look. Despite her concerns, Naomi had done what she could with her appearance. She'd washed her face and hands, brushed and repinned her honey-brown hair, and shaken out her dress, though it still showed the wrinkles and dust of travel. "You look fine," Zach said simply. "And Mrs. Hendricks isn't the type to judge a book by its cover. Besides, timing's good. She mentioned just yesterday that they need to find a teacher before the fall term." Naomi nodded, settling at the table with James in her lap. "Then I would appreciate the introduction." She accepted the cup of coffee Zach handed her, inhaling the rich aroma gratefully. "May I ask, how did you come to Red Cloud? You mentioned Missouri before." Zach placed a plate of eggs and bacon before her, then sat across the table with his own breakfast. "Came west after I lost Sarah and little Matthew. Couldn't bear to stay where everything reminded me of them." He took a sip of coffee, his gaze distant. "Worked cattle drives for a while, then as a ranch hand. Wound up here 3 years ago, when Mr. Donovan needed help with the livery. Town was growing, and he couldn't manage alone anymore. Suited me fine. I've always had a way with horses." "And you never thought to remarry?" The question slipped out before Naomi could stop herself. "I'm sorry, that's far too personal." Zach didn't seem offended. "Never met anyone that made me consider it," he said with a shrug. "And I've been content enough on my own." He looked at her directly then. "What about you? What brings you all the way from Illinois with a baby and no husband?" Naomi focused on her plate for a moment, considering how much to share. My husband was not a kind man, she said finally. When he started drinking heavily, he became violent. I stayed longer than I should have, hoping he would change back to the man I thought I married. But when James was born and his rages continued, she shook her head. I couldn't risk my son's safety. So I left. He looking for you? Zach asked, his tone matter-of-fact but his eyes sharp. I don't think so, Naomi said. Frank, my husband, has his pride. He'll tell everyone I ran off, paint me as the villain, and find someone else to torment. It's easier than admitting his own failings. She stroked James's soft hair. At least, that's what I pray is the case. Zach nodded slowly. Well, Red Cloud's a far piece from Illinois. And folks here mind their own business, mostly. He finished his coffee and stood. I need to tend to the horses, then we can head over to the Hendricks place. Take your time with breakfast. After he left, Naomi fed and changed James, then tidied herself as best she could. By the time Zach returned, she felt as prepared as possible for meeting someone who might hold the key to her future in Red Cloud. The Hendricks home was one of the finer houses in town, a 2-story clapboard structure with a wide porch and actual glass windows. Mrs. Eliza Hendricks turned out to be a plump, energetic woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense manner that Naomi found reassuring rather than intimidating. So you were a teacher back in Illinois? Mrs. Hendricks asked after the introductions were made and they were seated in her front parlor. James remained remarkably well behaved in Naomi's lap, studying the new surroundings with wide eyes. Yes, madam. For 3 years before I married. I taught all ages in a one-room schoolhouse much like I imagine you have here. Naomi kept her voice steady despite her nervousness. And your education? I attended the normal school in Bloomington, Illinois. I have my teaching certificate, though I fear it's still in Illinois. This admission made Naomi's heart sink. Without proof of her credentials, who would hire her? Mrs. Hendricks waved this away. We can write to verify if needed. More importantly, can you handle a classroom of 30 children ranging from 6 to 16, many of whom have had spotty schooling at best? Some of our older boys only attend in the winter months when they're not needed for farm work. I can, Naomi said with confidence. Teaching had been her passion before marriage had derailed her plans. I believe every child deserves an education, regardless of their circumstances or abilities. Mrs. Hendricks nodded approvingly. And the baby? How would you manage? Naomi had anticipated this question. James is a good baby, and by the time school starts in the fall, he'll be older and more predictable in his needs. I could arrange his feeding times around school hours and bring him with me. Many of my female students might benefit from learning childcare skills, and it would be no disruption to lessons. Zach, who had been silent until now, spoke up from his position near the door. I'd be willing to help out some, too. My cabin's not far from the schoolhouse. I could look in on the little one during my midday break from the livery. Both women turned to look at him with surprise. Naomi felt a rush of gratitude at this unexpected offer. That's very generous, Mr. Zimmerman, but I couldn't impose further. No imposition, he said simply. Like I said, it's on my way. Mrs. Hendricks looked between them with interest. Well, that's a practical solution. And it speaks to your character, Mrs. Winters, that you've made such a favorable impression on our Zach. He's not one to offer help lightly. She stood decisively. I'll need to confer with the other board members, of course, but I believe you would be a fine addition to our community. The position pays $30 a month during the school terms, with the possibility of additional income from tutoring. There's a small house behind the schoolhouse for the teacher's use, included with the position. Naomi could scarcely believe what she was hearing. $30 a month was more than she had hoped for, and a house of her own would mean independence and security for herself and James. That sounds more than fair, Mrs. Hendricks. I would be honored to accept if the board approves. Excellent. We'll meet tomorrow evening, and I'll send word of their decision. In the meantime, you'll need somewhere to stay. Mrs. Hendricks looked at Zach questioningly. Mrs. Winters and the baby are welcome to continue using my spare room, he said. No trouble at all. Mrs. Hendricks raised an eyebrow but nodded. Very well. Though perhaps, to avoid any unfortunate gossip, it might be best if Mrs. Winters helped out at the livery during the day. That way, your arrangement appears more as an employment situation than. Well, you understand. Naomi felt her cheeks warm. She hadn't considered how their arrangement might appear to others, but of course, Mrs. Hendricks was right. A young widow staying alone with an unmarried man would certainly raise eyebrows, even in a frontier town. I would be happy to earn my keep, she said quickly. I may not know much about horses, but I can clean, keep accounts, or whatever else might be useful. Good, that's settled then, Mrs. Hendricks said, clearly pleased with this solution. Now, Zach, if you'd be so kind as to wait in the front hall, I'd like a private word with Mrs. Winters. Once Zach had excused himself, Mrs. Hendricks sat back down, her expression softening. Now, my dear, woman to woman. Are you truly a widow, or are you running from a bad situation? Naomi started at the directness of the question. How did you know? Mrs. Hendricks smiled sadly. You wouldn't be the first woman to seek a fresh start in the West, away from an unkind husband. I was in a similar situation myself many years ago, before I met Mr. Hendricks. She patted Naomi's hand. You don't need to share the details if you don't wish to. But if there's any chance your husband might come looking for you, it would be best if the town was prepared. Relief flooded through Naomi at this unexpected understanding. I don't believe he will, but I cannot be certain. He has a violent temper, especially when drinking. Then we'll be watchful, Mrs. Hendricks said firmly. Red Cloud protects its own, and if the board approves your appointment, you'll be one of us. She glanced toward the hall where Zach waited. And it seems you already have one guardian looking out for you. Zach Zimmerman is one of the finest men in this county, loyal, honest, and braver than most. His recommendation carries significant weight with me. We only met yesterday, Naomi felt compelled to clarify. He's been extraordinarily kind, but we're hardly more than strangers. Sometimes the measure of a person is clearest in those first encounters, Mrs. Hendricks said wisely. Zachary has kept to himself since arriving in Red Cloud. To see him take such an interest in your welfare speaks volumes about both of you. She stood again, signaling the end of their private conversation. I look forward to welcoming you properly to our community, Mrs. Winters. As they left the Hendricks home and walked back toward the livery, Naomi felt lighter than she had in months. The possibility of a teaching position, a home of her own, and acceptance in this community was more than she had dared hope for when she'd stepped off the stagecoach just yesterday. Thank you, she said to Zach as they walked, for the introduction to Mrs. Hendricks, and for offering to help with James. You've been uncommonly kind to us. Zach kept his eyes on the path ahead, but she caught the slight upward turn of his mouth. Seems to me you're doing the hard part, Mrs. Winters. Starting over ain't easy. Please call me Naomi, she said impulsively. After all you've done, Mrs. Winters seems overly formal. He glanced at her then, his blue eyes warm. Naomi, then? And I meant what I said about helping with the little one. I've missed being around children. The simple admission touched her deeply. This man, who had lost so much, was offering not charity but a genuine connection, and she found herself grateful for it in a way that went beyond mere practical assistance. The next few days established a rhythm as they waited for the school board's decision. In the mornings, Naomi would help at the livery, keeping the account books in order while James napped in a makeshift cradle Zach had constructed from a wooden crate padded with blankets. The cradle sat in the small office at the front of the livery, where Naomi could keep an eye on her son while she worked. In the afternoons, Zach would take over the livery duties while Naomi explored Red Cloud, gradually becoming familiar with the growing town and its inhabitants. People were curious about her, of course, but generally welcoming, especially after word spread that she might be the new schoolteacher. In the evenings they would return to the cabin, where Zach would cook simple but hearty meals while Naomi tended to James. Their conversations grew longer and easier, covering everything from books they had read to their childhoods in different parts of the country. Naomi learned that Zach had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, the oldest of 5 children. He had a natural gift for storytelling, and his tales of life on the frontier often had her laughing despite herself. For his part, Zach seemed genuinely interested in Naomi's stories of teaching in Illinois and her dreams for the future. He never pressed for details about her marriage or her flight west, accepting what little she offered without judgment. 4 days after their meeting with Mrs. Hendricks, word came that the school board had unanimously approved Naomi's appointment. She would begin teaching when the fall term started in September, but could move into the teacher's cottage immediately. The news brought both joy and a strange sense of loss. Naomi would have her independence, but it also meant leaving the comfortable routine she and Zach had established. "This calls for a celebration," Zach declared when she shared the news. "How about dinner at the hotel restaurant tonight? It's the finest eating establishment in Red Cloud, which isn't saying much, but the steak is decent." Naomi hesitated. "That's a lovely offer, but I should save my money. I won't receive my first pay until after the term begins." Zach shook his head firmly. "My treat. You've more than earned your keep this week, straightening out those account books. Mr. Donovan was impressed enough to give me a bonus." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Besides, it's not every day Red Cloud gains a new schoolteacher." Put that way, Naomi could hardly refuse. "Then I accept, with gratitude." The Prairie Rose Hotel restaurant was indeed the finest establishment in Red Cloud, with actual tablecloths and a menu printed on paper rather than simply announced by a server. Naomi wore her one good dress, carefully pressed, and had pinned her hair in a more elaborate style than usual. James, freshly bathed and dressed in clean wrappings, behaved beautifully, alternating between sleeping and observing his surroundings with his solemn baby gaze. Zach had cleaned up as well, trading his working clothes for a clean shirt and vest, his usually unruly brown hair tamed with water. He had even trimmed his beard, revealing more of the strong line of his jaw. Naomi found herself noticing anew the breadth of his shoulders and the kindness in his eyes when he smiled. "To new beginnings," Zach said, raising his water glass in a toast after they had ordered. "New beginnings," Naomi echoed, touching her glass to his. "I still can hardly believe how much has changed in less than a week. When I arrived in Red Cloud, I had no plan beyond finding someplace safe to sleep that night." "Sometimes the best journeys are the ones without maps," Zach observed. "When I left Missouri, I had no destination in mind either. Just needed to keep moving until something felt right." "And Red Cloud feels right to you?" Naomi asked curiously. Zach considered the question. "It has. Good people, honest work, and room to breathe." He looked at her directly. "More so lately." The simple statement sent warmth spreading through Naomi's chest. Before she could respond, their food arrived: steak for Zach, chicken for Naomi, both served with potatoes and early summer vegetables from someone's kitchen garden. As they ate, other diners stopped by their table to introduce themselves and welcome Naomi to town. The genuine warmth of these greetings reinforced her growing sense that Red Cloud might indeed be the fresh start she needed. "Looks like you're already becoming part of the community," Zach observed after a particularly enthusiastic welcome from the blacksmith and his wife. "Thanks to you," Naomi said. "Your introduction to Mrs. Hendricks opened all these doors." Zach shook his head. "You did that yourself. I just pointed the way." As the evening drew to a close, Naomi found herself reluctant to leave the warm atmosphere of the restaurant and the even warmer company of her companion. In just a few short days, Zachary Zimmerman had become important to her in a way she hadn't anticipated. His steady presence and undemanding kindness had begun to heal something in her that she hadn't even realized was broken: her trust in men, perhaps, or simply her belief that goodness still existed in the world. The next morning, Mrs. Hendricks came to the livery to escort Naomi to her new home. The teacher's cottage was indeed small, just 2 rooms with a lean-to kitchen attached, but to Naomi, it represented freedom. The main room would serve as both parlor and bedroom for her, while the smaller room, originally intended as a study, would be perfect for James as he grew older. The furniture was basic but serviceable: a bed, a table with 4 chairs, a small writing desk, and a rocking chair placed near the stone fireplace. "It's perfect," Naomi said, turning to Mrs. Hendricks with genuine gratitude. "I can't thank you enough for this opportunity." "You can thank me by teaching our children well," Mrs. Hendricks replied with a smile. "Now I've had some of the ladies from church stock your pantry with basics, and there's firewood stacked out back. The well is shared with the schoolhouse, just a short walk across the yard. Is there anything else you need immediately?" Naomi thought of her meager possessions, still at Zach's cabin. "No, Mrs. Hendricks. You've all been more than generous." After Mrs. Hendricks left, Naomi stood in the middle of her new home, James cradled against her shoulder, and allowed herself to feel the full weight of this moment. For the first time in her adult life, she had a space that was truly her own, earned by her own abilities, where she would answer to no one but herself. The sense of accomplishment was heady. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Zach standing there with her bag in one hand and a wooden cradle in the other, not the makeshift one from the livery, but a proper cradle, beautifully crafted with curved rockers and smoothly sanded rails. "Thought you might need these," he said, stepping inside when she moved aside. He set her bag down and placed the cradle near the rocking chair. "The bag's yours, of course, but the cradle is a housewarming gift. Made it last night after you went to bed." Naomi stared at the cradle in astonishment. It was a simple design but perfectly executed, the wood gleaming with oil to protect it, the inside lined with a small mattress covered in soft flannel. "You made this? In one night?" Zach shrugged, looking somewhat embarrassed. "Had most of it ready already. Been working on it in odd moments since you arrived. Just finished it up last night." Touched beyond words, Naomi gently placed James in his new bed. He stretched and yawned but settled quickly, clearly finding the cradle to his liking. "It's beautiful, Zach. I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks. I enjoyed making it." He looked around the cottage, nodding approvingly. "This is a good place. Solid roof, tight windows. You'll be comfortable here. Will you stay for tea?" Naomi asked, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "I should at least offer you refreshment after carrying my things all this way." Zach hesitated, then nodded. Tea would be welcome. As Naomi busied herself with the kettle and tea things Mrs. Hendricks had provided, she found herself wondering what role Zach would play in her new life in Red Cloud. Their unusual meeting and the days they had spent under one roof had created a bond between them, but now that she had her own home and soon would have her own income, the practical reasons for their association were diminishing. Yet as they sat across from each other at her small table, the conversation flowed as easily as it had from the beginning. Zach spoke of his plans for the livery, his hope that Mr. Donovan might someday let him buy into the business. Naomi shared her ideas for the school, her excitement about meeting her students, her dreams of creating a place of learning that would serve the community for years to come. It was only when James began to fuss, signaling his hunger, that Zach rose to leave. "I should let you get settled in," he said, reaching for his hat. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." "Thank you, Zach. For everything." Naomi walked him to the door, James now quieting as she held him against her. Perhaps you'd like to come for dinner tomorrow?" "I'm not the finest cook, but I can manage a decent meal." The invitation surprised them both, it seemed. Zach's eyes widened slightly, but then he smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'd like that very much, Naomi. What time should I come? 6 o'clock? The sun will still be up, but the day's heat should have passed." 6 it is. I'll bring some fresh bread from the bakery." After he left, Naomi attended to James's needs, then began the process of making the cottage her own. She unpacked her few belongings, arranged the furniture to her liking, and swept the already clean floors, more as a ritual of claiming the space than from necessity. All the while, her mind kept returning to Zach's smile when she'd invited him to dinner, the care he'd put into crafting James's cradle, the ease she felt in his presence. It had been only 5 days since she'd met him, yet already he had become important to her in a way that both excited and frightened her. Her marriage had taught her harsh lessons about trusting too quickly, about mistaking attraction for love. Yet everything about Zachary Zimmerman seemed genuine, from his initial offer of help to his continuing kindness toward her and James. As the summer progressed, Naomi settled into life in Red Cloud. She prepared for the fall term by reviewing the schoolbooks Mrs. Hendricks provided, organizing the one-room schoolhouse, and meeting many of her future students as they came by with their parents to introduce themselves. James thrived in the stable environment, growing stronger and more alert each day. And through it all, Zach remained a constant presence in their lives. Their dinner together became a weekly tradition, alternating between her cottage and his cabin. On Sundays, they attended church services together, then often joined other townspeople for community dinners afterward. During the week, Zach would stop by the cottage on his way home from the livery, sometimes bringing small gifts: a bunch of wildflowers, a piece of candy from the general store, a wooden toy he'd carved for James. Never anything extravagant, but always thoughtful. Naomi found herself looking forward to these visits, planning her days around them, taking extra care with her appearance when she knew Zach would be calling. It was during one such visit, as summer was giving way to early fall, that their relationship took a significant turn. They were sitting on the small bench outside her cottage, enjoying the cooler evening air. James, now nearly 9 months old, was asleep inside in his cradle, and the windows were open so they could hear him if he woke. "School starts next week," Naomi said, breaking a comfortable silence. "I can hardly believe the summer has passed so quickly. Are you nervous?" Zach asked, glancing at her profile in the fading light. "A little," she admitted. "It's been some time since I taught, and this community is putting their trust in me. I don't want to disappoint them." "You won't," Zach said with quiet confidence. "You're a natural teacher. I've seen you with the children who come by. They already respect you, and that's half the battle won." Naomi smiled at his faith in her. "Thank you for saying that. And for all your support these past months. I don't know how James and I would have managed without you." "You'd have managed just fine," Zach said. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Naomi." She turned to look at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "I don't feel very strong most of the time. Just determined. That's what strength is," he said simply, continuing on despite fear or doubt. His gaze held hers, and Naomi felt something shift between them, a recognition of feelings that had been building all summer. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Zach reached out and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused from work, enveloping her smaller hand completely. "Naomi," he said softly, "I know it hasn't been that long since we met, and you've been through a lot. I don't want to rush you or make you uncomfortable. But I care for you and James deeply. More than I thought possible after losing Sarah and Matthew." Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. She had guessed his feelings, had, in truth, begun to hope for them, but hearing them spoken aloud made them real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "I care for you too, Zach," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm afraid. My judgment hasn't been the best when it comes to men." Zach's thumb moved gently over the back of her hand. "I understand that fear. All I'm asking is that you give us a chance. We can take it as slowly as you need. What would people say? I'm meant to be a respectable widow, an example for my students. Folk around here mind their business, mostly. And those that matter already know we're friends. Taking the next step wouldn't surprise anyone." He smiled slightly. "Mrs. Hendricks has been dropping hints about our understanding for weeks now." That startled a laugh from Naomi. "Has she really?" "Oh yes. Very subtle, Mrs. Hendricks is not." Naomi looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Zach's face, so open and honest in the twilight. In the 3 months she'd known him, he had proven himself in 100 small ways to be a man of integrity, kindness, and strength. The man her first husband had pretended to be, but never was. "I would like to give us a chance," she said finally, her decision feeling right and true as soon as the words left her lips. "But slowly, as you said. For James's sake as well as mine." Zach's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "That's all I ask?" He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "May I call on you properly then? Sunday after church?" The formal request, so respectful of her position in the community, touched Naomi deeply. "Yes, Zach. I'd like that very much." Their courtship progressed with the same steady care that characterized everything about Zach. He called on her every Sunday after church, sometimes taking her and James for rides in a borrowed buggy to explore the countryside around Red Cloud. During the week, he would often stop by after school let out, helping her with small repairs around the cottage or simply sitting with her while she graded papers, James playing at their feet. When the weather permitted, they would have picnic suppers by the Republican River that flowed near town, watching as James practiced his newfound crawling skills on the blanket they spread on the ground. Zach took genuine delight in the baby's development, encouraging his attempts to stand, teaching him simple games, treating him not as an obligation that came with courting Naomi but as a treasured individual in his own right. The first time Zach kissed her, it was on a crisp October evening under a sky ablaze with stars. They had been to a harvest dance in town, where Zach had proudly introduced her to everyone as Miss Winters, the schoolteacher, while his eyes said so much more. Mrs. Patterson, a grandmother of 3 of Naomi's students, had offered to watch James for the evening, insisting that the young couple deserved some time to themselves. After the dance, Zach walked Naomi home, their steps slowing as they approached her cottage, both reluctant to end the evening. They stopped at her door, and Zach took both her hands in his. "I had a wonderful time tonight," he said, his voice low and warm in the darkness. "So did I," Naomi replied, feeling a delicious anticipation building within her. "Thank you for asking me to go with you. Thank you for saying yes." He paused, his thumbs tracing small circles on her palms. "Naomi, may I kiss you good night?" The formal request, so characteristic of his respect for her, made Naomi's heart swell with affection. "Yes, Zach. I'd like that." He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. But Naomi had no doubts, not anymore. She tilted her face up to meet his, and their lips came together in a kiss that was gentle yet full of promise. Zach's hands released hers to cup her face tenderly, and Naomi found herself leaning into him, her own hands coming to rest lightly on his chest. The kiss was brief but perfect, a first step across a threshold they had been approaching for months. When they parted, Zach's eyes searched hers in the starlight, a question in their depths. "I should go in," Naomi said softly, though everything in her wanted to stay in this moment. "Mrs. Patterson will be waiting." Zach nodded, stepping back slightly though his hands lingered on her face for a moment longer. "Good night, Naomi. Sleep well." "Good night, Zach." Inside her cottage, after thanking Mrs. Patterson and checking on the sleeping James, Naomi touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of Zach's kiss. For the first time since fleeing her marriage, she allowed herself to imagine a future with love in it, a future with Zach. As fall deepened into winter, their relationship continued to grow. Naomi thrived in her role as teacher, earning the respect of both her students and their parents. James celebrated his first birthday, marking a year since Naomi had made the desperate decision to flee her abusive marriage. And Zach became an ever more essential part of their lives, his steady presence a foundation upon which Naomi found herself building new dreams. It was 2 days before Christmas when Zach came to her cottage, stamping snow from his boots before entering. James, now walking with increasing confidence, tottered over to him immediately, arms raised in a demand to be picked up. Zach obliged, swinging the boy into the air and eliciting delighted giggles before settling him on his hip. "Cold out there," Zach observed, accepting the cup of hot coffee Naomi offered. "Road to Hastings might be impassable by tomorrow if this keeps up." "Then I'm glad you've already done your Christmas shopping," Naomi teased. She had helped him select gifts for his family back in Missouri, whom he still wrote to regularly though he hadn't visited in years. "Actually, I have one more gift to find," Zach said, an unusual note of nervousness in his voice. "The most important one." He set his coffee down and shifted James to his other arm. "Naomi, I was wondering if you might take a walk with me. There's something I'd like to show you." "Curious," Naomi agreed, bundling James and herself up against the December chill. They walked through the snow-covered streets of Red Cloud, past houses decorated with evergreen boughs and candles for the holiday. Zach led them toward the livery but then continued past it to a small piece of land just at the edge of town. Here, wooden stakes had been driven into the ground, outlining what appeared to be the foundation of a building. "What is this?" Naomi asked, looking at the stakes with confusion. Zach set James down, keeping hold of the boy's hand as he reached into his pocket with his free one. "This," he said, "is my Christmas gift to you. Or rather, the start of it." He pulled out a folded document and handed it to her. "If you'll have it." Naomi opened the paper with cold-numbed fingers. It was a deed, she realized, to this very piece of land. And on it, both her name and Zach's were listed as the owners. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at him in confusion. Zach took a deep breath, his exhale clouding in the cold air. "Mr. Donovan has agreed to sell me half the livery business, just as I'd hoped. The papers will be signed after the new year. That means I can finally offer you and James the kind of home you deserve." He gestured to the staked-out land. "I've had plans drawn up for a house. 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a parlor big enough for your students to visit for special lessons. The building will start as soon as the spring thaw comes." Naomi's eyes widened as she realized what he was saying. "Zach." He went down on one knee in the snow, still holding James's hand, his eyes never leaving Naomi's face. "Naomi Winters, these past months have been the happiest of my life since I lost my first family. You and James have brought joy and purpose back into my world, and I can't imagine a future without you in it." From his pocket, he produced a small box, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single small diamond. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of allowing me to be a father to James, of building a life together right here in Red Cloud?" Tears filled Naomi's eyes, blurring her vision but not dimming the certainty in her heart. 6 months ago, she had arrived in this town desperate and afraid, with nothing but her baby and the clothes on her back. Now she stood on land that could be hers, facing a man who loved her not in spite of her past but as a complete person, respected for her strength and her heart. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Zach, I will marry you." James, not understanding the significance of the moment, but feeding off their emotional energy, clapped his mittened hands together with excitement. Zach laughed, rising to his feet and lifting the boy into one arm while pulling Naomi close with the other. "I love you," he said softly against her hair. "Both of you." "And we love you," Naomi replied, the words coming easily now, all fear banished by the certainty of Zach's steadfast heart. They were married on New Year's Day 1879 in the small church in Red Cloud, with the entire town turning out to witness the union of their schoolteacher and the livery man. Mrs. Hendricks had organized a reception at the town hall afterward, where tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes brought by every family in the community. James, dressed in a miniature suit that Mrs. Patterson had sewn specially for the occasion, charmed everyone with his attempts to dance to the fiddle music, his chubby legs stomping enthusiastically if not quite in time with the beat. When it came time to leave the celebration, Zach lifted James onto his shoulders and took Naomi's hand in his. They walked through town toward Zach's cabin, now their cabin, until the new house was built, accepting congratulations and well wishes from neighbors along the way. "Happy, Mrs. Zimmerman?" Zach asked as they reached the cabin, the new name still sounding wonderful to both their ears. Happier than I ever thought possible, Naomi replied honestly. And as Zach opened the door to their temporary home, where a fire burned warmly in the hearth and James's cradle, the first gift Zach had ever made her, waited beside the bed, she knew it was true. From the moment she had arrived in Red Cloud and found her baby sleeping in a basket of hay, her life had been transformed by the kindness and love of the man beside her. The new house was completed by early summer, just as Zach had promised. It stood proud at the edge of town, its fresh paint gleaming in the June sunshine, its generous porch wrapping around two sides to catch both morning and evening light. Inside, every detail had been planned with care: the spacious kitchen where Naomi could teach James and, someday, other children to bake, the parlor with its built-in bookshelves, the master bedroom with windows that caught the first rays of dawn. Zach's business partnership with Mr. Donovan flourished, bringing steady income and respect in the community. Naomi continued teaching, her classroom growing as more families moved to the area, drawn by the expanding railroad and the fertile farmland around Red Cloud. James, now approaching his second birthday, was joined in the Zimmerman household by a new arrival, a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth, born exactly 1 year after their wedding day. As Naomi sat on the porch swing one evening, nursing little Sarah while watching Zach teach James how to throw a ball in the yard, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The courage it had taken to flee her first husband seemed a distant memory now, overshadowed by the joy and security of her life with Zach. Red Cloud had become home in every sense, a place where she was valued for her skills as a teacher, respected as Mrs. Zimmerman, and loved completely by the man who had seen in her, even at her lowest moment, a woman deserving of rest, respect, and love. Zach looked up, catching her watching them, and smiled that same warm, genuine smile that had first begun to heal her heart. He said something quietly to James, and the two of them came up the porch steps together, the boy's smaller hand trustingly in his father's larger one. "What are my two favorite ladies doing?" Zach asked, settling beside Naomi on the swing while James climbed into his lap. "Just counting our blessings," Naomi replied, leaning into his side as his arm came around her shoulders. "And thinking how fortunate we are to have found each other." Zach pressed a kiss to her temple. "Not fortune, love. Providence. Some things are just meant to be." As the sun set over the Nebraska prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Naomi Zimmerman knew that Zach was right. Their meeting might have seemed like chance, a desperate woman seeking shelter, a lonely man offering kindness, but their love had been built choice by choice, day by day, creating a life together that was stronger and more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. And it had all begun with a baby sleeping in a basket of hay, and a cowboy who saw not their circumstances, but their worth.